I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event.
Princess Anne had faced family scandals, constitutional emergencies, and private betrayals without allowing her expression to crack. But when a sealed investigation file was placed before her inside Windsor Castle, the Princess Royal stopped turning the pages. Hidden household payments, unexplained private expenses, and a spending network linked directly to Queen Camilla had been uncovered. Anne did not speak. She simply stared at one figure on the final page and realized the crisis had already reached the king. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The silence hardened around her. Anne had entered expecting untidy accounts, perhaps a few careless approvals, but the figures told a darker story. The internal review, a formal examination comparing private royal costs with approved palace allowances, had begun as routine preparation for the next financial briefing. Now it showed that Camilla's household had redirected sums through hospitality, residential maintenance, personal staffing, and family-related expenses never clearly presented to the Finance Committee. Anne turned back 3 pages. The same authorizations appeared again, each tied to aides closest to the Queen Consort. She pushed her chair away and remained standing, one hand resting against the file, as though its weight had become physical. Her discipline mattered because she had spent decades protecting the monarchy from damage caused when privilege escaped scrutiny. If these entries were genuine, this was not merely waste. It was a threat to public trust. Charles entered moments later and stopped. The king knew his sister well enough to recognize the warning in her stillness. He asked whether Camilla knew the investigation had concluded. Anne looked directly at him and answered with one word: yes. The monarch reached for the report, but she kept her hand on the final page. A confidential appendix revealed the method. Several large expenses had been broken into smaller payments, keeping each transaction below the threshold that normally triggered review. The discovery mattered because it suggested planning, not confusion. Someone had understood the palace safeguards and moved around them. Anne then showed him the disturbing entry. Money marked as official royal maintenance had been spent on a private property used by members of Camilla's extended household. Charles read the address twice. His face tightened, and for the first time, he understood why his sister had gone silent. Before he could close the file, Anne pointed to a handwritten authorization code beside the payment. Only one person inside the Queen's household could explain how it had been approved. But the figures alone could not explain the betrayal, because behind every hidden payment stood a royal relationship already strained by loyalty, pride, and years of buried resentment. The scandal was not merely about money. It was about 3 people bound by family, yet divided by duty. Princess Anne saw restraint as the price of royal survival. Queen Camilla viewed her household as a private sanctuary she had fought decades to secure, and King Charles stood between them, forced to choose whether protecting his wife would damage the crown he had waited a lifetime to inherit. Every number in the file now carried a human cost. Anne had spent her adult life treating privilege as an obligation, never a reward. She accepted punishing schedules, avoided unnecessary comfort, and measured royal service by discipline rather than applause. That reputation mattered now because the Princess Royal was not examining ordinary private accounts. She was protecting confidence in the crown, the institution representing the sovereign and the wider monarchy. Any sign that public resources had been quietly bent toward personal benefit could damage far more than one household. Camilla had built her life inside a very different struggle. Years of hostility had taught her to guard every private space and trust only a small circle. After becoming queen, she created a loyal household that controlled access, protected her relatives, and shielded her from constant judgment. To her, those aides were not simply employees. They were the wall between survival and humiliation. Camilla received the message alone. The financial report had reached Anne. She read the words twice, placed the phone face down, and dismissed her aide with a steady voice. Only after the door closed did the Queen Consort allow her hands to tremble. She knew the investigation could expose mistakes, but she feared something worse, that it would make every past accusation feel true again. Charles found his sister before the next briefing. The king asked Anne not to treat every questionable payment as proof of deliberate deception. He reminded her that household systems were complicated, and that staff often acted under pressure. She listened, then told him that intention could not erase responsibility. Public money, royal credibility, and family loyalty had now collided. The investigation deepened that uncertainty. Camilla had not personally signed every transaction, but documented meeting notes showed that several payments were approved under verbal authority she had granted during private discussions. Anne also discovered that the Queen's senior household manager had repeatedly used her name to silence financial objections. William learned the truth during a confidential briefing, a private meeting where sensitive royal matters were discussed away from public view. The prince became tense and asked whether any money intended for engagements involving Catherine and their children had been redirected. No one answered immediately. That silence pointed backward to one forgotten evening, when a single request first convinced Anne that Camilla's household had crossed a dangerous line. Months before the investigation exploded, a private royal dinner ended with a request so unusual that Princess Anne refused to forget it. The gathering had been arranged to discuss charitable priorities. Yet before the final guests departed, one of Camilla's aides quietly presented a maintenance approval for a property that was not listed among the Crown's official residences. Anne watched the paper move across the table. Then she heard the explanation and knew someone was hiding the truth behind royal protocol. Charles had invited Camilla, Anne, and William to Clarence House for a quiet family discussion about the monarchy's reduced working schedule. Clarence House was the London residence long used by senior members of the royal family, but that evening it became something more dangerous, a place where private loyalty collided with public duty. No senior advisors were present. That mattered because every decision made in the room rested on trust alone. The meeting had nearly ended when Camilla's household manager entered carrying an approval request. He described the work as urgent security and restoration, linked to the Queen's private accommodation arrangements. His tone remained calm, but Anne immediately noticed the address. The property was regularly used by Camilla's relatives. It was not an official royal residence, meaning the Crown had no automatic responsibility to fund its upkeep. Anne asked why palace money was involved. Silence followed. Camilla answered first. The Queen Consort said her family faced security risks because of her royal position, and she insisted the work was necessary protection rather than private comfort. Anne listened without interrupting. Then she replied that personal vulnerability did not automatically create a public financial obligation. Her words were measured, but the warning beneath them was unmistakable. Charles tried to contain the tension. The king promised the expense would be reviewed later, and suggested they end the evening before the disagreement became personal. Anne set down her glass. She told him that delay would make any later explanation look like concealment, especially if the payment moved forward before scrutiny. 2 days later, the payment was approved anyway. The expense no longer appeared under maintenance. It had been moved into a category called Temporary Household Operational Support, a broad label used for short-term costs connected to royal work. Anne immediately understood what had happened. The wording had changed, but the purpose had not. She instructed a trusted royal auditor to examine similar payments from the previous 18 months. The search uncovered expenses tied to staff, transport, private entertainment, and properties outside normal palace control. When the first summary reached her, Anne closed her office door, removed her glasses, and circled one authorization code. It led directly to Camilla's senior household office. The dinner table disagreement had become something far more dangerous. And when Anne finally faced the queen consort, neither woman could hide behind politeness any longer. There were no courtiers in the room, no photographers, and no ceremonial language to soften what came next. Princess Anne entered carrying the investigation file beneath one arm. Queen Camilla was already waiting beside the fireplace, outwardly composed but gripping the back of a chair. Anne placed the report between them and asked one direct question. Had the Queen knowingly allowed her household to disguise private spending as royal expenditure? Camilla's answer did not calm the crisis. It ignited it. Charles had arranged the meeting inside a private Windsor sitting room, hoping the two women could resolve the dispute before the Royal Finance Council became involved. The council was the small group responsible for reviewing how palace money was approved, monitored, and protected. Once that body intervened, the matter would no longer remain a family argument. It would become a formal crisis. Anne came prepared. She carried marked pages showing the countryside property, household entertainment bills, and extra staffing allowances that had escaped normal review. Camilla arrived without advisors because she refused to be questioned in front of palace staff. The queen consort wanted control of the conversation. The Princess Royal wanted answers. Camilla listened until Anne began reading the figures aloud. Then she interrupted. She said years of pressure, threats, and public hatred had been reduced to cold columns on a page. Her voice shook, but her anger did not. She accused the king's sister of never understanding what it meant to enter the monarchy while millions waited for her to fail. Anne did not step back. She said hardship could explain private choices, but it could not excuse secret accounting. The words landed hard because the issue was no longer comfort. It was trust. If royal authority had been used to silence objections, then every explanation now looked weaker. Camilla pushed the file away. She insisted she had trusted her household to manage legitimate needs and had never ordered anyone to hide payments. Anne slid the report back across the table and asked why financial officers had been overruled using the Queen's name. The silence broke her defense. Camilla admitted she had verbally authorized flexibility for urgent costs, but denied telling aides to divide payments or conceal their purpose. Anne then opened a recorded meeting note, a written account preserving what was said during a private household discussion. It quoted Camilla, demanding that one disputed expense be settled without another humiliating committee discussion. The Queen's face changed. Her own words had become evidence. Charles entered after hearing raised voices. The king found his wife close to tears, and his sister standing rigid beside the table. He defended neither woman. Instead, he announced that control of the disputed budget would be removed from Camilla's office until he discovered who had manipulated the system. Yet his intervention did not end the struggle. It shifted the power toward the one royal whose next decision could either protect Camilla or permanently weaken her authority. King Charles had spent years defending Camilla against judgment from outside the palace. Now the greatest threat came from evidence produced within his own household. Sitting alone with the report, the monarch faced a brutal choice: shield the woman he loved, or prove that no royal, not even the Queen, stood above accountability. When he finally lifted his pen, the decision he signed changed the internal balance of the monarchy in a single stroke. Charles held ultimate authority as sovereign, the monarch who stood at the head of the royal household and approved its highest decisions. Yet money moved through trustees, senior officials, and separate public and private accounts. That structure mattered because one signature could not erase the system around it. The king had not authorized the hidden spending, but his reluctance to challenge Camilla's office had allowed that household to grow unusually independent. The silence deepened late into the evening. Charles read the confidential appendix alone, turning each page more slowly than the last. When he reached the section describing payments divided into smaller amounts, he removed his glasses and placed them beside the file. For several minutes, the monarch did not move. Charles feared what punishment would do to Camilla. Public humiliation could reopen wounds she had carried for years and reduce her queenship to another scandal. Yet protecting the queen consort now could destroy Anne's trust and confirm the darkest belief surrounding royal privilege, that rules changed whenever the family felt threatened. William entered with no speech prepared. The prince chose every word carefully, knowing he was speaking to both his father and his sovereign. He told Charles that private forgiveness belonged inside a marriage, but official concealment would belong to history. The future king did not demand punishment. He demanded separation between love and duty. Charles returned to the report and found the detail that broke his final resistance. Camilla's household manager had received broad spending discretion after arguing that repeated approval requests caused the queen personal distress. A second official had warned the king's private secretary months earlier, but the concern had been downgraded to avoid conflict between royal households. That choice had protected peace. It had also protected the problem. Charles lifted his pen and signed the order. The document froze discretionary spending controlled by Camilla's senior office and placed all future payments under a temporary panel chaired by Anne. An independent auditor, an outside financial expert with no household loyalty, would monitor every approval. The decision moved through the palace before dawn. Events were cancelled. Staff began preparing resignations. Camilla received the notice and understood, with sudden clarity, that the household she had built for protection was beginning to collapse. By morning, the freeze had become a new reality, forcing everyone closest to her to decide whether loyalty meant staying or escaping before blame reached them. The first consequence arrived before breakfast. A senior aide submitted his resignation. Then scheduled payments were suspended, private events were cancelled, and staff members were ordered to surrender access to financial systems. Queen Camilla watched the household around her fall into fearful silence. For years, those rooms had offered protection from public judgment. Now every closed door felt like an accusation, and the people who once acted in her name were beginning to protect themselves instead. Charles's freeze stopped every non-essential expense linked to Camilla's household, including private hospitality, additional travel, renovation work, and flexible staffing arrangements. The order mattered because those funds had once moved with little resistance. Now each payment required outside approval, and every past decision was being examined for signs that private comfort had been placed above royal duty. Camilla learned of her household manager's resignation while preparing for an official engagement. The queen consort read the message, dismissed her dresser, and sat alone. She removed the brooch she had planned to wear and held it in her hand without speaking. The aide had repeatedly assured her that every arrangement was lawful. His sudden departure felt less like resignation and more like abandonment. Camilla also understood what the public would see. A senior official leaving at the height of an investigation would look like guilt, even before the final judgment. She had spent years rebuilding her place inside the monarchy. Now one exit threatened to pull that work apart. Anne felt no victory when the news reached her. The Princess Royal said, accountability required testimony, not disappearance, and ordered that all relevant correspondence be preserved. That correspondence meant emails, notes, and written instructions capable of showing who knew what and when. She wanted evidence, not scapegoats. The departing official left behind a documented statement. He claimed Camilla had been told the general purpose of the spending, but had never been shown the methods used to secure approval. Auditors soon found a troubling split. Some expenses had directly benefited the Queen, while others had been created by staff trying to anticipate her wishes without clear orders. Charles then delivered the next blow himself. The king cancelled a private reception planned through Camilla's office and told her no event could continue until the accounts were cleared. She asked whether he believed she had ordered the deception. He answered that belief no longer mattered without proof. That evening, Camilla sent Anne a private request. She wanted one meeting, with no advisors and no formal record. The Queen Consort was not preparing another defense. She was finally ready to admit what fear had made her ignore. For the first time since the crisis began, the two women would meet without files, officials, or the king between them, and the truth would sound very different when spoken as a confession rather than an accusation. Camilla entered the room alone. No secretary followed her, and no folder rested in her hands. Princess Anne had expected another defense, perhaps even a demand that the investigation be softened. Instead, the Queen admitted that she had known her household was spending too freely. She had not understood every transaction, but she had stopped asking questions because the answers made her feel exposed. For the first time, Anne saw not defiance across the table, but fear. The meeting took place in a small room at Clarence House, with no aides, lawyers, or household officials present. That absence mattered because the investigation had already proved how the money moved, but not how much Camilla personally understood. Anne had agreed to listen because responsibility could not be measured by figures alone. It depended on what the Queen knew, what she ignored, and why she chose silence. Camilla spoke carefully at first. She admitted resisting repeated reviews because every challenge felt like another reminder that some people still believed she did not belong inside the monarchy. The Queen Consort had spent years fighting for acceptance, and she had begun to treat scrutiny as another form of rejection. Anne did not soften. The Princess Royal told her that insecurity became dangerous when it encouraged silence. Trust could survive an honest mistake, she said, but not a system designed to prevent uncomfortable questions. Camilla lowered her eyes because she knew the difference mattered. Camilla then reached into her handbag and removed a handwritten list. She placed it on the table between them. The document identified the expenses she was prepared to repay personally, including family hospitality, private staffing, and costs linked to the countryside property. The confession went deeper. Camilla revealed through a documented personal account that she had confronted her household manager weeks earlier after discovering an inflated staffing bill. He reassured her that the figures were justified, and she accepted his explanation rather than informing Charles. She also admitted telling staff to avoid embarrassing delays, words that ambitious aides had treated as permission to bypass safeguards. Anne offered no absolution. She proposed full repayment, permanent financial oversight, removal of those responsible, and a direct acknowledgement to the king. The Queen Consort listened, then quietly agreed. Camilla paused before leaving. She asked whether Anne believed the monarchy could forgive weakness. The Princess Royal answered that forgiveness began only after responsibility had been accepted. Their private agreement gave the palace a path forward. But beyond its gates, the story was already breaking, and one unforgettable public image would define the scandal before the crown could explain it. By sunrise, the secret household spending investigation had escaped the palace. Broadcasters interrupted morning programming, commentators questioned royal accountability, and crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace. But one newspaper front page captured the national mood more powerfully than any speech. Beneath a photograph of Princess Anne leaving Windsor with a rigid expression, 5 enormous words dominated the page. The princess who said no. In that moment, the scandal stopped belonging to Camilla's household. It became a test of the crown. The palace confirmed that discretionary spending inside the Queen's household had been frozen until the final financial review was complete. Discretionary spending meant money used for flexible costs, such as hospitality, travel, staffing, and private arrangements, rather than fixed official duties. Officials stressed that the investigation concerned specific household expenses, not the monarchy's entire financial structure. That distinction mattered because public anger was already spreading faster than the explanation. The debate divided almost immediately. Some demanded severe punishment, arguing that royal privilege had once again protected those closest to power. Others believed Camilla had been failed by aides who used vague authority to approve payments she never fully understood. Neither side showed patience. The story had become emotional before the evidence had finished speaking. Outside Buckingham Palace, television crews reported live as a small crowd gathered beneath the gates. One woman held a handwritten sign reading, "Duty means everyone." Others applauded when Anne's role in the review was mentioned. The moment turned the Princess Royal into a symbol of accountability, but she felt no triumph. Camilla watched the broadcast alone. The Queen Consort saw decades of public rehabilitation reduced to one spending controversy. When a commentator questioned whether she deserved continued financial independence, she switched off the television. Silence returned, but the humiliation remained. Anne reacted differently. She told William during a private conversation that the investigation was meant to restore discipline, not create a winner and a villain. The prince agreed, yet he knew public confidence now depended on a clear response. Later, he publicly supported the reforms without attacking Camilla, calling responsible stewardship essential to preserving trust in the monarchy. The palace then announced through a formal written statement that Camilla would repay every expense identified as private. Staff members who had split or disguised payments would permanently lose financial authority. Charles also approved a new rule requiring separate written authorization whenever royal money could benefit a family member or privately used property. The public had received accountability, but not yet a final verdict. Charles summoned Anne and Camilla for one last meeting, where repayment, responsibility, and the Queen's future authority would be settled permanently. The shouting outside the palace could not decide Camilla's fate. That judgment would come inside, where three members of one family had to choose between pride, punishment, and the survival of trust. The final meeting contained no raised voices. The investigation had exposed the spending. The confrontation had shattered old defenses, and the public had delivered its anger. Now only responsibility remained. King Charles sat between his wife and his sister as the repayment order was placed on the table. Camilla signed first. Anne signed the oversight reforms second. Then the monarch added his name, closing a crisis that had threatened not merely a household budget, but the moral authority of the crown itself. Charles read the final review once more before setting it down. The report concluded that Camilla had allowed an excessively secretive spending culture to grow, but she had not personally created the methods used to divide payments or disguise their purpose. Senior household staff who manipulated accounting categories were dismissed. Officials who ignored earlier warnings received formal disciplinary action. Camilla signed the repayment agreement without protest. The Queen Consort accepted responsibility for every private and family-related cost identified by the audit and agreed to repay the money from her personal funds. She also surrendered independent control over discretionary household spending, meaning flexible expenses such as hospitality, travel, and private staffing would now require outside approval. Camilla then turned to Charles. She admitted through a documented statement, placed with the final review, that fear had guided too many of her choices. Every question had felt like humiliation. Every review had felt like proof that she still did not belong. The king accepted her apology, but he made one thing clear: affection would never again be allowed to weaken financial safeguards. Anne refused every attempt to describe the outcome as her victory. The Princess Royal had not frozen Camilla to defeat her. She had stopped a system that had become dangerous. In a quiet exchange after the meeting, she told the Queen that protecting the monarchy sometimes meant standing against those closest to it. Charles then approved the final reform. A unified Royal Expenditure Council would now oversee the households of the King, Queen, Prince of Wales, and every senior working royal. The council was a permanent financial body, designed to apply the same approval rules to everyone, regardless of title or family position. Camilla returned to official duties under reduced household authority. Her first engagement was subdued, but she carried it out without complaint. The Queen understood that trust would not return through ceremony, rank, or public sympathy. It would return through discipline. The investigation destroyed neither her queenship nor Anne's compassion. It forced both women to confront unchecked loyalty. One had protected her household too fiercely. The other protected the crown by refusing to look away. The file was closed, the money was returned, and the household was rebuilt under stricter control. Camilla remained queen, but her authority had changed forever. Charles remained her husband, yet proved he could still act as sovereign. Anne's frozen reaction became the moment the palace finally chose public trust over private embarrassment. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.